let me tell you a little bit about my context, because it frames up a lot of this stuff that I'm going to talk about. So I'm not in Texas or Michigan or Wisconsin. I'm in North Carolina. So it's on the other side of the country over there. And our church is called Mercy Hill, and it was planted in 2012. So we just celebrated 10 years. I understand that in Texas, maybe a mega church might be defined a little bit differently, because I think everything's bigger. Everything's bigger in Texas, yeah. I think. But so in North Carolina, we're considered a mega church. We're like 3,000 people, and we're a multi-site church, six campuses, man, we're trying to. Our objective is by 32. We're trying to baptize 5,000 people and send 500. And so the college ministry for us plays a massive role in that, because it's sort of the engine of our sending arm of our church. A third of the people that we have sent out so far, we first met on the college campus. And so a lot of stuff that I want to talk about, I would say that we didn't do it intentionally. We kind of did it out of this necessity. And then we realized we had been doing it, and so we sort of systematized what had been working. And so that's kind of what I want to bake in. Now, we got into all that stuff just like a lot of folks did on the front end of Mac Lake doing all of his stuff around Leadership Pipeline. And so, he took all of that from a book called Leadership Pipeline that Ram Charan wrote, and he contextualized that for the local church context. That's what the little thing is that I've drawn up there on the board. I call it the zipper. I don't know what you call it, if you've ever seen this stuff before, but the idea is that if you want to move somebody from being average Joe in the church to like church planter, you have to have a process to get them from that place to there. That doesn't just magically happen. People don't just wake up one day and say, now I'm a church planter. They have to be developed. And so what I want to do first is show you kind of what that looks like in our church context. So for us, that starts, somebody has to be a community group leader before they can ever be identified to be moved into here. So when we start talking about moving people through a pipeline that turns them into being a church planter, that is all done by shoulder tapping. It's not somebody that opts into that. We go to them, identify them, and say, hey, we think that you need to take this step. They get from here somebody that's a pretty good community group leader, where we've watched them. We'll invite them into this thing that we call a ministry cohort. And that ministry cohort is nowhere near as exciting as it sounds. It is simply a sifting ground. And we pull these guys in for 2 years, and once a month they get together and they talk about stuff that is not really that big of a deal. It's pretty low bar stuff when it comes to ministry. So they're talking about things like, what is gospel centrality? I mean, it's really not heady. I mean, it is like basic stuff. We'll talk about what's your motivation in ministry. What's the role of preaching in the local church? And they're doing this on a monthly kind of thing. So it's like a topic per month. So it's not even like they're going over a whole bunch of content. It's just they're getting touch points with our staff around these kinds of concepts. And we're watching what they dig into, because what we're doing is we're sifting through this to see where we're going to put them next. And so as we do this, these guys are going to come out of here, and some of them, a few of them, we may say, hey, just keep leading your community group. What we're hoping will happen with these people, and where most of it goes, is we're going to say, hey, we want to put you in the elder track. We want to put you in our process to become an elder in our church. Or we think we want to see you go into this church planting pipeline now. Or we want to put you on track to be sent to the nations. And so this is where we figure all that out, where those next steps happen. When we come out of this ministry cohort, And so we say, hey, we think we've done some assessment stuff work with you here, and we think that one day you're going to be a church planter, but you're not ready yet. We put those people in this thing that we call, and when I say in this thing, I don't mean like in a room with like a closet or something. I mean, it's another process. So we'll put guys in a church planting incubator, and that thing's running for 2 to 5 years, depending on how much time they need for their development. It's very individualized. But they all have certain benchmarks they have to hit, but they're going to hit those benchmarks, in their own timetable, because everybody develops at different paces. So some of those benchmarks that they're going to do here is they have to multiply a community group. They've got to lead an international mission trip during this time. They've got to start a business from nothing while they're in this thing. There's a whole bunch of reading stuff they've got to do while they're in here. They have to, we're looking at them and saying things like, hey, you're pretty good at communicating the gospel, but when you're around people, you're kind of a jerk. And so we need you to not suck at talking to people anymore. So we're going to point that out. We're going to round out the edges, and we're going to call them out on all that kind of stuff. So it can be a pretty rough kind of process sometimes, but it's always about getting them to the place where they're now a church planter that's getting ready to be sent out. Once they get all of those benchmarks hit, and we say, hey, we're ready to put kind of our stamp of approval behind you, then they go into this thing that we call the fellowship. By the time they get to the fellowship, they have identified what the name of their church is going to be, the city where they're going to plant the church. They've written up their prospectus for what the church plant's going to be. They have picked out who their number 2 person is that's going to go with them. They've done all this stuff before they ever get to the fellowship. So when we announce to them, and the big reveal weekend happens, and we put them up on the stage, and everybody cheers and talks about, hey, we're getting ready to plant this church in this city, and this is the guy that's going to be doing it, and this is his family, and this is who's going to be going with him, and all of that. Everybody, yay, all of that. These things have already happened. And so once that reveal happens, this is a 9-month process during the fellowship. During that 9 months, he's only doing really 2 things. He is developing recruiting and developing his launch team that's going to go with him, and he's raising a ton of money. Because to plant churches well, you got to have a ton of money. So that's the only stuff that's happening here. He during this fellowship, he leaves his community group, and his community group becomes his launch team. He's leading them. All the money that his launch team is tithing to our church gets shifted over into the account with his church, so it gets all banked into there. And he just goes around preaching at all these different places, getting as many reps as he possibly can. Then, once we plant them out, they become part of what we call Mercy Hill family of churches. They're an autonomous church. We continue to coach them, help them to be successful. Other churches that are in the family will help resource them with things. Hey, I'm trying to make this decision about this. We've got this church discipline issue that's going on. How do y'all think we should handle this? It's like just a big kind of family, that's doing life together. So that's kind of what the church planting pipeline looks like. So you can see the whole thing is built around, you take somebody that's just like a normal leader in your church, and you're turning them into somebody that's going to be amazing. For us, our first 2 church planters that went out had never been on a church staff before. I mean, it wasn't like they were serving in some kind of staff role. They had been a community group leader. We made them an elder, and then there they go, and then they were out the door to plant churches. So, and both of them have gone pretty well. So that's kind of the way that works for us. Now, when you look at this, you say, well, how in the world does that apply to college ministry? Well, you've got pipelines for everything, because you also want to be able to turn just average college student into a college student that is then sent out once they graduate. So how do you do that? Any questions on that before I move to the college stuff? All right. This is all super basic stuff. I know that a lot of you're seeing this and you're like, Johnathan, man, I've seen this crap. Oh, I just said crap on this thing, and I probably shouldn't have said that.
Sorry, Mitch. No, it's
Sorry, Mitch. I said something I shouldn't have.
Is there a point at which they are brought on staff in that process, or could they be not on staff literally up until they're in the fellowship? Or even could they not be on staff in the fellowship?
So in the fellowship, we pay them.
Okay.
Yeah, they're not doing another job in the fellowship, but it's not a big salary at all.
No, I believe that.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I don't want to say it on here. I don't think on a recording. But it's a pretty small salary that they're making, and most of them will raise some additional money that they'll add on to that.
But you go all the way through ministry cohort and incubator.
Can doesn't don't have to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Without being on staff.
Yep.
Okay.
Good. Mm. Yep. The question there was, can you go through the pipeline without being on staff? The answer is yes, until you get to the fellowship, and then you come on staff for a much smaller salary.
That's great.
Y'all ready to do the college one? All right, here we go. There's no way they're going to put this online somewhere.
No way.
They're going to be like, there's no way we can edit this, man. I'm just going to keep saying things you got to edit out, okay? Y'all hear me on that? You hear me? All right, here we go. So here's what you got. You got like a group member. That's a college student. They're involved in some small group that we have that's going on. Family groups are what we call them. Then up here, they get to a place where they're leading a group. After they're leading a group, they're in their last part of their year, similar to what y'all do in Salt Company, like senior year, something like that. We'll call them an intern. They're not getting paid or anything. They're just helping disciple a bunch of the younger leaders that are in the ministry. After they do this, they'll come up here. They'll become a resident in our ministry. And after they become a resident, then they're sent out. What that looks like when they're sent out is they're either going to go on a church plant somewhere, they're going to go overseas somewhere, or they're going to go back into the marketplace where they are, living out the gospel in the marketplace. So that's what that looks like. It's pretty similar. I mean, it's nowhere near as intense, but the idea, once again, is you're just turning Joe Blow college student that loves Jesus into somebody who is, living on mission.
Do the residents, can they be plucked out and moved into like a ministry cohort? Would that be a place that they'd be pulled from?
Not until after they finish the residency.
How long is the residency?
2 years.
Is it paid?
They raise their support.
Yeah. All of it?
All of it.
How many residents does Greensboro location have right now?
We have, so there's I think there's 8 that are in the college ministry, but maybe 15 across the whole church.
Youth residents,
Yep.
other residents?
Yeah. I always forget how many we have. Yeah. Brandon could tell you. That's Brandon Newton. Brandon Newton from Mercy Hill Church could tell you how many residents we have. This thing is so ridiculous.
What are the responsibilities of like an intern in their senior year?
They're just helping to disciple other leaders, so they'll like leading D groups and stuff like that.
Cool.
Yeah. They'll help with our summer projects, stuff like that. I'll put it on. Make sense? All right, so this is like no big deal. So when you think about how you go about turning somebody from here to here, you have this process. But what we have found is simply having a process of moving somebody from here to here doesn't really work. It takes a lot more than that. Okay? So, repopulate the pipeline with the original stuff I put on there with church planner. And this what I want to show you here is how we go about creating that stress. All right? So, one of the things that we say, a couple of things. First is, if it can be counted at Mercy Hill, we want it to be going up and to the right. You know what I mean? It's got to be growing. We're like hound dogs about growth. We will do anything to make sure that we're still growing. I mean, almost anything to make sure that we're still growing. Got to harness momentum and keep riding that thing. Gosh, that probably doesn't sound good either. So the other thing is that we say we want to multiply everything. And when we say multiply everything, what's the everything? Everything you can think of. We want to see it multiply. And I'm going to show you. Groups. This is how we think about it at the absolute base level. So when we think about when you multiply groups, what kind of need does that automatically create?
You need leaders.
Yes, you got to have more leaders. Every time you start a new group, you got to have a new leader.
And
Now,
people in the groups.
you do. So here's what's cool though. This for us, this whole thing that we're getting ready to build, we're building a series of yeses. That's what all this is about. And so this first yes that people say is the hardest one. Because the way that we go about multiplying groups is we don't say, hey, we're going to take this group and we're going to split it in half, and now we have two groups, and we're going to grow two groups. What we do is we say, hey, group leader, find an apprentice in your group, raise them up to be the leader, teach them how to lead the group, and then they are going to leave your group and go start a new group. And they're not going to take anybody from your group with them.
Who's going to be in the group?
New people in the church that are looking for a group. So what they're doing is they are saying, I am getting ready to leave my community, the people that I have confessed sin to, the people that I have walked through sickness with, the people that know all this junk that's going on in my kids' lives, the people that I have walked through in all kinds of immense pain. I'm getting ready to walk away from them and go start that for a bunch of people that haven't ever had that. All right? That's a pretty big yes. It's a pretty big yes. So they're saying yes to leaving their community. After we multiply groups, the next thing we multiply. When you multiply a worship service, what do you create a need for?
Preachers, worship leaders, space.
Maybe not space.
Oh, yeah, multiple services.
Yeah.
Hospitality.
All your serve teams.
Oh, service, yes.
All your serve teams, all the leaders of those serve teams. Oftentimes, new worship staff or worship leaders that are there. So now you've got more volunteers and leaders. Now, when you start a new service, you got, let's say you're running two services at, say, 9:30 and 10:45. And you want to start a new service. When do you do that? When do you start a new service?
Are you saying what time?
Yeah, what time? What time?
Shift all three. Have an 8.
Okay. So
8, 9:45, and then 11.
So the 9:45 and the 11 would be optimum times, right? 8, who wants to go to an 8 o'clock service? Old people, right? Most people don't want to go to an 8 o'clock service. And so what you do when you start one of those new services, you're automatically saying to people, here's what we need you to do. We need you to move from the time that's really good for you to a time that sucks for your family. And we need you to do that. Why? Because there are more people that need to come in at the prime service time to hear the gospel. So you move out of the way to let other people do that. You inconvenience yourself so that other people can hear the gospel. That's a pretty big yes. So they're saying yes to inconvenience. Well, at some point, you've filled up all the services times that you can in that space. And so you're faced with a couple of options. Do you just build a new building? You can, but that doesn't create stress. To create stress, you start multiplying campuses. And now, when you multiply campuses, what do you have to have? What needs are you creating?
New leaders, new pastors.
Yep, that's the new layer you've added right there. So all of that stuff, all the leaders and volunteers, you got to have that. But now you got to have new pastors. You got to have new elders in place. All the folks that are leading that thing. You definitely have to have new worship teams because you're in two different locations now, right? So it's pastors, worship, yep, staff, and all of that.
Kind of got multiplied by 2 now.
That's right. That's right. And then what are they saying yes to? Because now that's exactly right. So now what's happening is you have people, the way that we do it, it's a videoed campus, right? And so now people are saying, hey, I would prefer to be in the place where the live preaching is going on, but I am going to choose to go to this place where the video preaching is going on so that somebody else can come to the place where the visitors tend to come and be able to hear the gospel, right? Not only that, oftentimes they are driving past that first location to go over here to the other part of the city to be a part of a launch team to start a new campus. They are saying yes to moving for the mission. You see how it builds a series of yeses? So then, when you decide to multiply churches, what does it create the need for here?
More pastors.
Yeah, now you got to have a new lead pastor, right? So you got to have the lead guy and the staff and everything else. At this point, people are saying yes to actually packing up everything in their home and moving their entire lives for the sake of the gospel. But here's what we find. The people that go on our launch teams, this right here is the easiest yes they give. Because this is the hardest. And they keep getting easier all the way up. All right? So, last Thursday, just commissioned out our launch team that's moving to Norfolk, Virginia. And 38 people standing on the stage to go with that launch team. How many of that 38 do you think were coming from the main broadcast campus?
Probably less than the ones who went on the campus ones, right?
3.
Oh, yeah.
3.
They haven't said yes to anything yet.
Yeah. Almost everyone that goes on a church plant does so from a campus because they've already said all these yeses. Right? So what you're doing along this process here is you are intentionally creating, you can make decisions all along the way that would ease the stress on the church by building buildings and stuff like that. But you're intentionally not doing that for the sake of increasing needs where people step into it. You're like stressing the entire organization intentionally to give places for people to step in and lead. Do things they haven't done before. Make sense?
Yeah.
We need to stop there for a second?
Is the reason to plant campuses instead of go straight to churches like a lack of preachers? Like, because in my head, you've got a guy on video for campuses. Is it because you don't have enough preaching? Is it because of the quality of the preaching? Why not just go straight to plant churches?
Because it builds one more yes, and it allows us to create more leaders. For us, this is the secret sauce of our church planting arsenal.
Develop leaders.
Yeah,
Do that.
yeah.
Because they would go, like if I got someone in services, their next yes wouldn't be a church. It would be, it goes, go bigger leadership at this campus.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then,
Yeah.
Kind of like what leads in.
It's just extremely pragmatic. Yeah. It's extremely pragmatic. There are people that will try to go into all the philosophy around this stuff, but for us, it's a thing that's like, it is the greatest tool that we have in developing leaders to plant churches. If there's a better tool that's out there that we find, we'll abandon that and do that other thing. But for us, this is like the thing that we use because it's the best thing we found.
What's a pastor's role at a campus?
That's the awesome thing. Can you imagine what it would be like to be how much time a pastor could spend leading the congregation if he didn't have to spend the 14 hours every single week in preparing a sermon?
So the congregation that goes to the campus has some sort of familial identity where it's like, no, this is our campus.
Oh, yeah.
It's not just like, oh, we watch it over there.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
How far are your campuses from your main broadcast location? What's the average?
Like 20 minutes.
6 campuses?
Mm-hmm.
3,000 people. How many people go to the main campus?
It's the biggest. But the seating, max seating in that space is like 500.
Oh my gosh. 3 services or 4?
Thursday night, 2 Sunday morning, and Sunday night.
4 at the main?
Mm-hmm. 4 at the main. Yeah. 2 everywhere else. Yeah. And but live preaching only happens at Thursday night. That's where it's recorded. And then Sunday morning, Sunday night, it's play the video.
Do you treat Sunday night almost as if it was a campus? And that way? Or it's the same team?
Yeah. Our culture is such that, sometimes there'll be a video Sunday morning. Lead pastor's gone that weekend, and he was on schedule to preach that weekend.
Live worship at all your campuses?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Is there a pastor that does a welcome or a host?
Yep. The campus pastor does all that stuff. Yeah. Yep.
Nice.
All right.
Is this somehow connected to sending overseas? It's the same kind of strategy, I guess, or maybe probably different?
Yeah. So this is just the people that go overseas are also here.
Yeah.
They
just asking yes to moving overseas.
Yeah. Yep.
Could you see a way in which, it doesn't have to do this, but could you see a way in which, so I thought if it's more difficult for me to start a campus for whatever reason, or even that isn't a bent, isn't a direction, the idea of trying to start, of treating a service, a Sunday night service, as if it was a campus. Totally different team, different XYZ thing, recording of the preaching. Would that have the potential, even though it's in the same space?
I don't know. We haven't ever done something like that. Yeah. Part of it for us as we think about it too, we're trying to make it easier for people to get an expression of our church to different parts of the city. So the idea of, hey, we're going to take it to them instead of always expecting them to come a long way to us. Right. We don't, and this, I should make this distinction too. We don't plant campuses. We don't plant campuses where we don't have people.
That's good.
Right. So if it's taking new ground, we're planting a church there. If we've got a whole bunch of people coming from this area of our county already in our church, we're just going to put a campus there so they don't have to drive as far. And then they can invite their neighbors to the place that's closer instead of them having to drive half an hour.
How big of a small group can it get before you say, hey, it's time to multiply this bad boy?
As big as they want it to be.
Really?
We don't put parameters on that, but whatever they can fit in their house.
Yeah.
Different people have different size houses.
That's so interesting, because we're feeling the stress of that with groups saying, all right, we're going to split them in half. And then those groups are really comfortable because they've already got their community, but they're also half as large, and adding to it feels complex. Instead of saying, that is such a different yes. That's
Yep.
We struggled with that, the splitting of the group, kind of like what you're saying. So I guess that'd be still.
So what I want to do is I'm gonna flip something on its head for a second, and then I'm gonna come back and because this isn't college ministry. So what I want to do is populate this with how do you do this within the context of a college ministry. Okay? I was just trying to give you the macro first of what it looks like in the church and the whole philosophy behind the whole thing. Whoever's listening to this, it'd be really great if you could see it. But you can't, so you gotta trust me that it's awesome. Is it awesome?
It's good, yeah.
Everybody just said it's awesome. Okay. There's no way they're putting this on the internet.
No.
I'll also probably never be invited to do a breakout session again. All right. I'll tell you what, let's erase this whole thing and flip it. Are we good on time?
Yes.
We got 5 minutes. No, we got 15 minutes.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, good.
Great, 20 minutes done.
20 minutes.
20? All right, so we're talking about, remember the leadership pipeline, that's about creating leaders. This whole reverse pyramid thing over here, that's about creating need and opportunities for people to step into leadership. If you just do the one, you don't get sending. So this is kind of how I want to show you all that how it works. Think about the culture of the church here. So if you have a church, and we can all think of churches like this, that doesn't do anything to develop leaders, and they don't do anything to create need for more leaders. In regard to sending, well, that church is stagnant. They're just not doing anything. And it's kind of boring to be a part of churches like that. It's not what I want to get up out of bed in the morning to do. But have you ever been a part of a church that had all these needs of leadership, and they were pushing to the limit, but they weren't doing anything to develop leaders? What that church feels like is everybody is experiencing burnout. Because the same few people is doing everything. You know, you're not doing anything to prepare people to step into these places. Instead, you're burning the few out that are doing all the things. If you've ever experienced a church, and I know churches like this, they get hold of all that leadership development stuff, and they just pour and pour and pour into that. But they never do anything over here. That church is bloated. They're slow. They may send, but if they do, they're going to do it real slowly. Because bloated things don't move fast. I am not fast. Those of you listening to this that can't see me, I'm a large man. Leaders and opportunities at the same time. When you do both of those things in tandem, that is when you build a sending culture. But it takes both of them. I'm going to stop. Anybody need to press in? Because the next thing I'm going to do is going to hurt a little bit.
The look of bloated and burnout, like, is it possible to mix those up? Like to say, like, we feel burnout, and it's like, actually, you just might be bloated. Like someone articulating, like, we're tired or something. It's like, well, maybe
Wouldn't
you're
that be
tired.
more bored though, since there's so many leaders that there's not enough work to be going around?
People that are bloated.
Get tired easier.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. And if they're just doing a whole lot of leadership development, they're having a whole lot of meetings throughout the week, and they're just developing leaders, then you could create people that are tired from developing leaders. Sure, you could do that. That's probably some of the danger in college ministry. where we're too slow to pull the trigger in releasing somebody to lead ministry, you know? And we pour more into them, and then we fatigue them by how much we're pouring into them. The pathway from here to here. What most churches do is they say, we need to develop some leaders so that we can release them into ministry from excess. That's the first step. When a church diagnoses themselves as, hey, we don't have any sending going on. Like maybe you're sitting in a position, I don't know what context, but you're talking about the dream, right? And so what you may be saying is, man, for us to get from a place of here where it's a dream to get to here, what we got to do is we got to start investing in our people to turn them into turn them into leaders that we can then send out. So that looks like this. And that just doesn't work. It doesn't work because it slows everything down. Now, if you want to be slow about it, I mean, yeah, it can probably work. But our context, we don't like slow. So if you think about like Larry Osborne has this thing that he calls the 4 tires that stunt church growth. Some of you maybe have heard of that. Some of you haven't. The 4 tires. So think of the growth being like the water that's running through a hose. And so if a car pulls over that hose, if any one of those 4 tires are sitting on that hose, it stops the water from running through the hose. It doesn't matter which one it is. The 4 tires are speed of decision making, seating capacity in your facilities, kids capacity in your facilities, and parking capacity outside your facilities. Any one of the, at any time one of those things gets pinched, your church stops growing, right? And so for us, as the church is growing, what we just refuse to let happen is something that is in our control to stop that. So we have no idea how long the faucet is going to be turned on that God is going to just like be pouring into our church. It's nothing that we have done to earn that, but by His grace, He has chosen to just turn that thing on. We have no idea how long it's going to be on, but while it's on, we don't want to do anything to waste it. And so that means that we're going to make decisions to move things as fast as we possibly can. So for us, what we have found is the pathway is that. Which means that over and over and over again, we intentionally apply stress to our organization so that it creates an immediate need for people to rise up to the surface in leadership. It create the need first and then help them rise to the surface. It's just faster. Example? Helpful? Would it be helpful if I gave an example? So,
would it be like equipping the call person?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely that. But it's forcing the call upon them, so to speak. So it's like we during COVID, one of our campuses. I mean, everything was just like, you know, it was like everybody else, you know. So we're looking at one of these campuses. We shut the campus down and said, hey, everybody that's at this campus, come back to the broadcast location. And so we did that. We did that to create momentum back in the one room because it just felt stale, you know, with so few people in there. Well, as we did that, it was the right decision because the momentum came back. People started coming back. Church started growing again. And what happened was that at that campus, it became incredibly uncomfortable to worship there. Families coming in, they couldn't even find seats for their family to sit together. Running an overflow room, it was absolutely maxed out in that space. And so we're going, man, if we keep this up, it's going to make people have such a bad experience that they're not going to come back, and it'll cause our church to quit growing. And so what we're going to do is we need to, as fast as possible, reopen that campus. So we put a 2-month turnaround on that thing. Told the church that we were going to be doing that, and we challenged the church, we need 300 of you to move from this campus to this campus on this week. 300 people didn't move. 500 people moved. Which 500 people moved? The leaders. So all of these leaders moved from the main campus over to this new campus that we're leading. What does that create at the main campus? A massive vacuum. And all these people that had been sitting on the sidelines and not on the front lines now felt like, man, there's a place for me. And so they step up. And then we train them. So that's one place. Another place where we intentionally did it, when we didn't quite feel the need in such a way. We have a Spanish-speaking campus. They started, COVID's still going on. They had about 45 people that were at that campus that we started it with. It had been a church plant that had been kind of not doing so well. And we decided to absorb them in, prop them up, give them the infrastructure that they needed to be able to be successful. They take on our DNA, all that kind of stuff. And so they bump up to about 80 people. The room that they're in, that they're worshiping in, the space that we gave them, once you get to about 100 people in there, it just feels uncomfortable. But they're sitting there at 80. They can continue to go on. We're like, hey, we need you to go to 2 services. They're like, culturally, we don't know that that's good for us to go to 2 services. And we're like, if you're going to grow, which if you're part of our church, you got to grow, you got to go to 2 services. And this is the day that you're going to 2 services. And here's the problem. They had a handful of leaders that were there, and they were like, if we go to 2 services, we're not going to have the people that we need to pull off all the stuff. And we're like, trust us. They go to 2 services, and their serving teams multiplied by like 3 because they have less people in the room, but now they couldn't depend upon the same people anymore, and so it made more people step up to the plate. And we did that before we actually needed to. The only reason we did it was because we wanted to see more leaders. Does that make sense?
How do you apply that to college?
That's what we want to talk about, isn't it? So, when you take this, the stuff that I was talking about, when you start talking about services and campuses and churches and all that kind of stuff, that doesn't play so well with college. Groups does. So let's start there, all right? So if you start at the group level and you start multiplying groups in the way that I was just talking about, the exact same thing is happening, where you're creating a need for more group leaders, and you're causing college students who the biggest thing they crave is community, to say goodbye to their community, to go start a new community for people that don't have community. That's a pretty big deal in their lives. What is another place where you can do that in college ministry? I thought about coming in here and just populating this thing. And I was like, I think it'd be better if we think about it.
So what's another place that, say it again?
What's another place, another thing that you can multiply that will create need and an opportunity for college students to say another layer of yes?
You want a service opportunity or a mission trip or?
Yep, I think that is certainly one.
Yeah.
Not the next one.
I think there's one before that.
I mean, if you multiply services, there's volunteer needs that college students fill. I don't know. College ministry?
Like, think about all the,
Size, like,
I guess if we do our midweek
teams,
gathering.
like teams.
there it is. Yeah. So you take ministry teams, maybe even, you don't even need any more. But you're like, let's create the need for more. And so you're like, hey, let's multiply the teams that we have sharing the gospel on campus. Let's multiply the teams that we have doing outreach events on the campus. Let's multiply the teams that we have serving in some kind of way inside the church, doing something in the community. Let's make more of that so that you create an opportunity for more leaders and more volunteers to step up onto those teams. In the meantime, they're saying yes to now I'm going to give up more of my time for the sake of doing something for others outside of myself. This is not about me going to something else for my discipleship. This is about me giving things away. They're already getting the discipleship here. I mean, our tendency is the way that we get people to make progress is we create another way for them to be discipled. When you need to be making them say yes to something that's outside of themselves. What happened here? Zach already said it.
Oh, my overseas. So I said, yes, I overseas.
I'm going to make it even bigger. Okay? A summer project. So now, this place, you're creating a need for people to go and do summer missions over the course of their entire summer. Leaders for the teams that are going out and doing that. And over here, they're saying yes to giving up their entire summer for the sake of the mission.
Can you also throw in a winter project?
If you so desire. Just winter, you get like what, 3 weeks? And
Yeah.
here you get like 8. So we think 8 is a bigger ask.
Right.
Sequential.
The same idea still.
Yep, that's right. Let's say we have, you asked the question how many we had. Like we've got, say 15 residents in the church. Do we need more than that? No. But if we create more slots for them to do that, it's not about us getting what we need. It's about us developing people to be sent. All right? That's the whole purpose. So we create more space for people to do residency. They're learning what it looks like to do ministry. They are being prepared to be sent out. They're getting the skills that they need. And over here, they're saying yes to giving up 2 years of their lives after they graduate college. And so after they have said yes to giving away 2 years, man, it is not a big ask at all when you say, hey, would you go do what God made you to do someplace that's strategic for the mission of God?